letters and apocalypses, or revelations, claimed the authority of apostles to offer believers a peek behind the divine curtain. In this vibrant and chaotic marketplace of ideas, churches all over the Roman Empire used different collections of writings. Some communities read from a letter known as the Shepherd of Hermas, while others revered the Epistle of Barnabas. It was a fluid and decentralized faith. But as Christianity grew from a persecuted sect into a major religion, a problem popped up. With so many different texts, which ones were truly authoritative? Which ones held the authentic teaching? Once a candidate for the New Testament, fall from grace? The answer lies in the shifting tides of theology and power in the 3rd and 4th centuries. As the church became more structured, leaders wanted a more uniform and controlled doctrine. The raw and frankly brutal vision of the Apocalypse of Peter started to cause some problems. First, there were doubts about who really wrote it. Like many texts from this era, it was pseudepigraphal, written in the name of a famous figure to give it authority. As scholars and bishops began to look more critically at where these texts came from, books that couldn't be confidently traced back to an apostle were viewed with suspicion. Even the author of the Muratorian fragment notes that while they receive the Apocalypse of Peter, some of us are not willing that it be read in church, hinting at an early controversy. Second, its theology was becoming a bit awkward. The graphic, tailor-made tortures, which borrowed imagery from Greek and Roman ideas about the underworld, were seen by some as too crude for a merciful God. As influential theologians like Origen and later Augustine developed more sophisticated ideas about sin and salvation, the stark, physical punishments of the Apocalypse of Peter just seemed primitive. And there might have been an even more radical idea in some early versions of the text, that some souls could eventually be saved out of hell. In the longer Ethiopic version of the book, after seeing all the horrors, there's a prayer suggesting God's mercy might ultimately win out over his judgment. This idea, known as apokatastasis or universal salvation, was fiercely rejected by the emerging orthodoxy, which was cementing the doctrine of eternal, unending punishment for sinners. A scripture that offered a potential escape clause from hell could be seen as a threat to the church's authority. Finally, while not the main issue for this book, there was a general crackdown on any theology that seemed to undermine the core belief in Jesus' full humanity and physical suffering. Other texts, like the Gospel of Peter, were associated with a belief called Docetism, the idea that Jesus only seemed human. The tense climate made any non-standard text a potential target for exclusion. Section 4. The Disappearance and Rediscovery. As the 4th century rolled on, the fate of the Apocalypse of Peter was sealed. Influential leaders like Athanasius of Alexandria, a key figure in shaping the New Testament, issued lists of canonical books. In his famous Easter letter of 367 AD, which gave us the definitive list of the 27 books in the New Testament we have today, the Apocalypse of Peter was nowhere to be found. It was officially out. The book wasn't just forgotten, it was pushed aside. Church councils solidified the canon, and any text not on the list was discouraged from being read in churches and, eventually, from being copied. The vision of Peter, once a source of divine truth for many, was now labeled apocryphal, spurious, and unauthoritative. For over 1,500 years, the Apocalypse of Peter practically vanished from the world. It wasn't entirely forgotten, as it was known through a few tantalizing quotes in the writings of early church fathers, but the full text was lost. Then, in the winter of 1886, a French archaeological team digging in a monk's grave in a desert cemetery in Akhmim, Egypt, made a stunning discovery. They unearthed a small parchment book. Inside was a fragment of the long-lost Greek manuscript of the Apocalypse of Peter. Decades later, a more complete version written in Ethiopic was also found. After centuries of being buried, the scripture that almost changed everything was brought back into the light. Its rediscovery has given us a richer, more complex, and far more diverse picture of early Christianity. It shows that the story of faith was never a single, straight line, but a messy, vibrant, and contested history. The ideas in these lost books didn't just vanish either. They echoed through the centuries in surprising ways. The Apocalypse of Peter's detailed vision of justice and hell became a major influence on medieval Christian literature, and is seen by many scholars as a forerunner to works like Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. The book may have been buried, but its spirit lived on. Conclusion. The story of the Apocalypse of Peter is more than just a historical curiosity. It's a powerful reminder that history is often written by the victors. The Bible we read today is a product of choices made by powerful people who decided which visions of faith would last and which would be set aside. The Apocalypse of Peter offered a Christianity that was raw, visceral, and brutally clear about the consequences of our actions. It presented a vision of divine justice that was both terrifying and, in its own way, reassuringly absolute. But it was a vision that ultimately didn't serve the needs of a growing church that favored order, theological sophistication, and doctrinal control over popular, graphic revelations. What might Christianity look like today if this book had been included? How would our ideas of sin, justice, and mercy be different? We can never know for sure, but the rediscovery of the Apocalypse of Peter invites us to wonder about the roads not taken, the voices silenced, and the other hidden histories still waiting to be unearthed. If you found this dive into hidden history compelling, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.